that had no understanding of money flow. And that is exactly what is happening in the United States Treasury at this moment in time.
Hey everyone, welcome to the first chapter of today's video, where we're diving deep into a political firestorm that unfolded at the recent Senate Banking Committee hearing, a moment that's been lighting up discussions all over the internet. I'm so excited to break this down for you, because it's a classic case of Washington insiders versus outsiders trying to shake things up, and I'm firmly on the side of the outsiders in this one. We're talking about the clash between Senator Mark Warner and Senator John Kennedy over Elon Musk's DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, and let me tell you, this is a debate that gets to the heart of what's wrong with our government today. Let's start with Senator John Kennedy, because his perspective is what really sets the stage for why this whole issue matters. And I'm 100% behind him on this. Kennedy came into this hearing with a no-nonsense attitude, and he made it crystal clear that he's all about transparency and accountability when it comes to how the federal government spends our hard-earned taxpayer money. He pointed out something that I think hits home for so many of us. For years, decades, even the government has been spending our money on things that most Americans would find absolutely outrageous. For example, Kennedy highlighted how the government spent $60 million to buy condoms in Guatemala and Sudan. $60 million! Let that sink in for a second. That's not a small amount of money. And it's being spent on something that, frankly, doesn't seem like a top priority for the American people. But that's not all. Kennedy also brought up another example that had me shaking my head. The government used taxpayer dollars to fund a transgender opera in Colombia. Now, I'm all for cultural projects. But really? A transgender opera in Colombia? Is that what the average American wants their tax dollars going toward when we're dealing with issues like inflation, rising healthcare costs, and crumbling infrastructure right here at home? Kennedy doesn't think so, and neither do I. He argued that DOGE, which is led by Elon Musk and backed by President Donald Trump, is doing something that should have been done a long time ago, auditing the federal government to root out this kind of wasteful spending and bring it to light. Kennedy made a really important point during the hearing. He clarified that DOGE only has read-only access to the Treasury's payment systems, meaning they can look at the data but they can't edit or manipulate anything. They're not there to mess with the system or cause chaos, they're there to shine a light on what's been going on behind closed doors for far too long. Kennedy's big question was this: why should anyone have a problem with the government being forced to explain where our tax dollars are going? He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the American people deserve to know what's happening with their money, especially when it's being spent on things that don't seem to benefit them at all. I couldn't agree more with him. Transparency is something we've been lacking in Washington for way too long, and it's about time someone stepped up to demand answers. I mean, think about it. How many times have we heard stories about government waste, but nothing ever gets done about it? Kennedy and DOGE are finally taking action, and I think that's something we should all be cheering for. There's this quote from Hannah Arendt that I love. She once said, "The most powerful way to affect change is to make the invisible visible." That's exactly what Kennedy and DOGE are doing. They're making the invisible visible, exposing the waste and fraud that's been hidden from us for years. And I think that's a mission worth supporting. Kennedy also made another great point that I want to highlight before we move on. He addressed the concern that some people, including Warner, have about the identities of the people working for DOGE. Warner and others have been asking who these people are and whether they have security clearances. But Kennedy pushed back on that. He argued that publicly disclosing the identities of everyone working for DOGE could actually put them in danger. He brought up the fact that we've already seen acts of violence and vandalism against Tesla vehicles across the country, simply because Elon Musk endorsed Donald Trump. People have had their Tesla cars firebombed or vandalized just for driving an electric car. Can you imagine what might happen if the names of DOGE employees were made public? Kennedy's point is that these people are doing important work to hold the government accountable, and we shouldn't be putting their safety at risk just to satisfy the curiosity of some Washington insiders. I think he's absolutely right about that. Protecting the people who are working to make our government better should be a priority. And Kennedy's focus on the bigger picture here is spot on. But not everyone at the hearing was on board with Kennedy's mission. And that brings us to Senator Mark Warner, who had a very different take on DOGE's involvement tone that I think misses the mark in a big way. Warner, who used to chair the Senate Intelligence Committee and is now the vice chair, came out swinging with some pretty serious concerns about DOGE being allowed to access the U.S. Treasury's payment systems. He was clearly worried about the fact that DOGE, under Elon Musk's leadership, was given this kind of access without what he considers proper vetting or oversight, and he didn't hold back in expressing his frustration. Warner pointed out that some of the people working for DOGE are reportedly as young as 25 years old, and he questioned whether they even have the necessary security clearances to be looking at such sensitive data. He kept pressing on one key issue. Does DOGE have read-only access, meaning they can only view the data, or do they have read and write access, which would allow them to potentially edit code or manipulate payment flows? Warner argued that if someone without a banking background or proper security clearance gets into the Treasury systems, it could be an absolute disaster for America's reputation. He made a really vivid comparison to the private sector, saying that if a bank allowed an unvetted person to access their customers' private banking information, that bank's reputation would go straight to hell. Warner stressed that banking, and by extension, the entire U.S. financial system, including the government's operations, is built on trust and reputation. If people lose confidence in the system, whether it's a private bank or the U.S. Treasury, they'll pull their money out faster than you can imagine, and no amount of regulation can stop that kind of panic. He gave an example to drive this point home. Imagine if a major bank like Wells Fargo or J.P. Morgan Chase suddenly lets some random person with no credentials look at all their customers' transaction data. People would lose trust in that bank overnight, and they'd start withdrawing their money in droves. Warner argued that the same principle applies to the U.S. government. If the public starts to doubt the integrity of the Treasury's payment systems because of DOGE's involvement, it could lead to a crisis of confidence that would have ripple effects across the entire economy. Warner also brought up some serious national security concerns, which makes sense given his intelligence background. He warned that if DOGE were to publicly disclose payment flows without understanding their full context, like, for example, payments that are part of covert government operations, it could put lives at risk and seriously damage America's standing on the global stage. He gave a hypothetical scenario to illustrate this. Let's say the U.S. government is funding a secret operation to support allies in a conflict zone, and those payments are funneled through the Treasury under a cover. If DOGE were to make those payments public, or even if they accidentally leaked them, it could expose the operation to our adversaries, think Russia, China, or Iran, and that could put American lives and the lives of our allies in danger. Warner kept coming back to this idea that the full faith and credit of the United States, the strength of the dollar, and the government's reputation are all built on trust, and letting unvetted individuals into the Treasury's systems could undermine that trust in a heartbeat. He even went as far as to say that if the bad guys or foreign adversaries find out about certain payments because of DOGE's actions, it could jeopardize national security on a massive scale. Warner called on his colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, to see this as a bipartisan issue, arguing that protecting the reputation of the United States should be something everyone can agree on, regardless of party lines. He also pointed out that the Treasury isn't even the right place to be making determinations about whether a payment is illicit or illegal. That's the job of agencies with specific oversight, not a group like DOGE that's just coming in to audit. Warner's tone throughout the hearing was one of urgency. Really seemed to believe that DOGE's involvement is an imminent threat to the stability of the U.S. financial system and our national security. And he implored his colleagues to take action before it's too late. I can see where Warner is coming from. He's obviously very passionate about security. And as someone who's dealt with classified information for years, he's probably hypersensitive to any potential leaks or breaches. I mean, this is a guy who's spent years on the Senate Intelligence Committee, dealing with some of the most sensitive issues facing our country. So it's not surprising that he's sounding the alarm here. But here's where I think he's going way overboard. Warner didn't provide any concrete evidence that DOGE has actually done anything wrong. He's throwing out a lot of what-if scenarios and hypotheticals. But he hasn't shown us a single case where DOGE has misused their access or caused any harm. For example, he didn't point to a specific payment that DOGE has exposed that led to a security breach, or a specific instance where their actions caused a loss of public trust. It's all speculation. And I think that's a problem. To me, this feels like he's trying to create a narrative to undermine Elon Musk and DOGE. Maybe because he's uneasy about outsiders coming in and exposing the government's dirty laundry. And let's be honest, Warner's concerns seem to conveniently sidestep the bigger issue that Kennedy highlighted right from the start: the federal government's lack of transparency and accountability. DOGE is trying to fix that by making the government spending visible. Just like Hannah Arendt said, make the invisible visible. And I think Warner's focus on hypothetical risks is a distraction from the real problem. Kennedy already clarified that DOGE can't edit anything, they're just there to look and report back, so Warner's fears about them manipulating the system don't really hold water, in my opinion. If anything, Warner's reaction makes me wonder if he's more interested in protecting the status quo than in actually addressing the waste and fraud that Kennedy and DOGE are uncovering. I mean, if the government has been spending $60 million on condoms in Guatemala or funding operas in Colombia, shouldn't we be more focused on fixing that instead of worrying about hypothetical security risks that haven't even happened yet? Warner's concerns might sound serious on the surface, but when you dig into them, they start to feel more like a smokescreen to avoid accountability. So, are Warner's concerns legit? Or is he just trying to protect a broken system that's been wasting our money for years? Let's dive deeper into Kennedy's response in the next chapter, because that's where things really heat up, and I'll tell you why I think Kennedy is absolutely right to support DOGE's mission and call out the real issues we should be focusing on. Hey guys, let's jump into Chapter 2. And oh man, this is where the Senate Banking Committee hearing gets seriously wild. Senator John Kennedy totally takes over and just destroys Mark Warner's whole argument about DOGE. I'm telling you, Kennedy was on fire, and I'm so here for it. Because he didn't just defend DOGE and Elon Musk, he went straight for the jugular and exposed some insane stuff about USAID that's been going on for way too long. So let's break it down. 'Cause this is the part where Kennedy shows why he's the real deal. And I'm totally Team Kennedy on this one. First things first. Kennedy wasn't about to let Warner's scare tactics slide, you know. All that stuff about DOGE, maybe having read and write access and messing with the Treasury's payment systems. Kennedy shut that down real quick. He was like, nope. Hold up, DOGE only has read-only access, okay? They can look at the data, but they can't touch a thing. He made it super clear that DOGE is just there to audit and check things out, not to mess with anything, and he basically called Warner out for freaking out over something that's not even happening. I mean, come on. Warner was going on and on about what if this and what if that, but Kennedy was like, show me the proof, where's the evidence DOGE has done anything wrong? And guess what? There is none. I love how Kennedy just brought it back to the facts. 'Cause that's what we need right now, no more of this fear-mongering nonsense. But here's where it gets really good. Kennedy didn't just stop at defending DOGE. He flipped the whole conversation and started exposing some crazy stuff that DOGE has uncovered, and this is the part that had my jaw on the floor. He brought up how DOGE's audits have revealed all this ridiculous government spending that's been happening for years, like, you're not gonna believe this, but the government spent $60 million on condoms in Guatemala and Sudan. I'm sorry. What? $60 million for condoms in other countries? And that's not even the wildest part. They also funded a transgender opera in Colombia. Like, are you kidding me? I'm all for art. But why are we spending American taxpayer money on an opera in Colombia when we've got so many problems right here at home? Kennedy was like, "Do you think Americans want their tax dollars going to stuff like this?" And I'm sitting here like, heck no! He said that thanks to DOGE, we're finally finding out about all this wasteful spending. And then he dropped a bombshell about USAID, Agency for International Development and, oh my gosh, this is where it gets really messy. Kennedy straight up accused USAID of stripping and robbing American taxpayers blind for years, and he was not holding back. He said USAID has been throwing billions of dollars into all these projects overseas, and most of the time, there's basically no oversight, like, nobody's even checking where the money's going. He gave an example that really stuck with me. USAID has been spending millions on agricultural projects in random countries, while our own farmers here in the US are struggling to get by. I mean, how does that even make sense? We've got farmers in places like Iowa and Nebraska who can barely pay their bills, and we're out here funding agriculture in other countries? Kennedy was like, this isn't just a one-time thing, it's been going on forever. And nobody knew about it until DOGE started digging. I'm sitting here thinking, wow, this is insane. How did we let this happen for so long? What I really love about Kennedy's take is how he made it about more than just the money. He made it about fairness and what's right. He was like, look, we've got veterans who can't get the health care they need, families who are struggling to put food on the table. And meanwhile, USAID is out here blowing billions on stuff that doesn't even help Americans. That hit me hard. Because he's so right, we should be taking care of our own people first. And DOGE is finally making that conversation happen. Kennedy also pointed out how this whole thing is a total game changer for how we think about government spending. He said that for the past 4 years under Biden, all we ever heard in Washington was, who's gonna pay more taxes? Who's gonna pay more taxes? But now, thanks to DOGE and Trump pushing this forward, the question is finally, yo, where did all our money go? And I'm like, yes, that's what I want to know. Kennedy said DOGE is giving us the transparency we've been begging for. And he gave a big shout out to Elon Musk and his team for stepping up and doing the hard work that nobody else in Washington wanted to touch. I think that's so powerful. 'Cause let's be real. Politicians and bureaucrats have been dropping the ball on this for years, and it took someone like Musk to come in and shake things up. Another thing Kennedy brought up that I thought was super smart is how all of this isn't just about saving money, it's about rebuilding trust with the American people. When we find out our tax dollars are going to stuff like condoms in Guatemala or operas in Colombia, it makes us feel like the government doesn't care about us, you know? It's like, why should I trust you with my money if you're just gonna waste it on stuff like that? But Kennedy said that by exposing this waste, DOGE is giving us a chance to take back control and make sure our money goes to things we actually care about, like fixing our roads, helping our schools, or making sure our healthcare system doesn't leave people behind. He even threw in a little dig at the government, saying if they really cared about efficiency, they would have moved the Treasury to a real-time payment system years ago instead of sitting around doing nothing. I was like, ooh, good one, Kennedy. That little jab just shows how he's not just reacting to Warner, he's making a bigger case for why we need DOGE now more than ever. I know some people might say, well, government spending is complicated, and we can't just focus on the US all the time. But I'm with Kennedy on this. We deserve to know where our money's going. And if it's not being spent on stuff that helps us, then we need to change that. DOGE is making that possible. And that's why I'm so pumped about what Kennedy's saying here. So, with Kennedy totally clapping back and exposing USAID, we're starting to see what DOGE esationali. So, now that we've seen Kennedy totally clap back at Warner and expose USAID for all the shady stuff they've been doing with our tax dollars, let's zoom out a bit and talk about what this all means. Not just for us here in the US, but for the whole world. Because this is so much bigger than just one Senate hearing. DOGE, with Elon Musk and Trump leading the charge, isn't just shaking things up in Washington. They're starting a movement that could change how governments everywhere think about spending and accountability, and I'm so pumped to dive into why this matters so much. Let's start with what DOGE is really doing here. Because it's not just about finding random weird expenses like condoms in Guatemala or operas in Colombia. Although, yeah, that stuff is pretty wild. What DOGE is actually doing is forcing the US government to look in the mirror and own up to decades of bad habits. For way too long, Washington has been this black box where billions of dollars go in, and nobody really knows where they come out, or at least, the average American like you and me doesn't get to see the full picture. DOGE is basically ripping that black box wide open and saying, hey, you gotta show us the receipts. I think that's huge, because it's not just about saving money, it's about changing the whole culture of how our government operates. Kennedy hit the nail on the head when he said this is about rebuilding trust with the American people, and I'm like, yes, exactly. Think about it. When you find out your tax dollars are going to stuff that doesn't make sense, like funding agricultural projects in some far-off country, while our own farmers are struggling, it makes you feel like the government doesn't even care about you. It's like, why am I working so hard to pay my taxes if you're just going to waste it on stuff like that? I know I've felt that way sometimes, and I bet a lot of you have too. But with DOGE coming in and exposing this waste, it's giving us a chance to demand better, to say, hey, if you're going to take my money, you better spend it on things that actually help me and my community, like fixing our pothole-ridden roads, or making sure our kids have good schools, or helping our veterans get the health care they deserve. That's what accountability looks like, and I think it's a total game changer for how we think about our government. But let's take it a step further. Because this isn't just about what happens here in the US, this has implications for the whole world. And I'm not even exaggerating. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency, which means pretty much every country on the planet relies on it for trade, investments, all that stuff. When the US government looks irresponsible with its money, like when it's spending billions on things that don't make sense, it doesn't just make Americans mad. It makes other countries nervous too. Imagine you're a country like Japan or Germany, and you're holding billions of dollars in US bonds. And then you hear that the US is blowing money on random projects with no oversight. You'd probably start wondering, is my money safe with these guys? That's a real problem. 'Cause if other countries lose faith in the US dollar, it could mess up the whole global economy. Like, we're talking stock market crashes, trade deals falling apart, all kinds of chaos. But here's the good news. DOGE's work could actually help fix that. By making the US government more transparent and accountable, DOGE is sending a signal to the world that we're serious about getting our house in order. It's like saying, hey, you can trust us again. We're not going to waste money anymore. We're going to be responsible. I think that's so important, because if the US can lead by example and show the world what real accountability looks like, other countries might start following our lead. Imagine if places like the UK or Canada, or even smaller countries, started doing their own DOGE-style audits. What a difference that could make. It's like a ripple effect. One country gets better, and then others feel the pressure to step up too. Wouldn't it be amazing if, 5 years from now, we're looking at a world where governments everywhere are actually transparent about how they spend money? I know that sounds like a big dream, but I really think DOGE is planting the seeds for that kind of change. And it all starts with what they're doing right here, right now. Another thing I want to talk about is how DOGE is proving that outsiders can make a difference in a system that's been stuck for way too long. Let's be real. Washington is full of career politicians and bureaucrats who've been doing things the same way forever. And a lot of them don't want things to change, because it might mess up their little power games. But then you've got someone like Elon Musk, who's not a politician, he's a business guy, a problem solver, someone who's used to thinking outside the box. And you've got Trump, who's always been about shaking up the establishment. Together, they're bringing a totally fresh perspective to the table, and I think that's exactly what we need. Kennedy said it best when he gave props to Musk and his team for doing the hard work that nobody else in Washington wanted to touch. I mean, think about it. How many politicians have you heard say, "Oh yeah, we need to audit the government and cut waste"? They all say it. But how many actually do it? Almost none. It took outsiders like Musk and Trump to come in and actually make it happen. And I think that's a lesson for all of us. Sometimes, the best change comes from people who aren't part of the system, people who aren't afraid to ask the tough questions and demand real answers. That's why I'm so excited about DOGE, because it's showing us that we don't have to just accept the way things are. We can push for something better, and we can make it happen if we've got the right people leading the charge. Now, I want to bring this back to something Kennedy said that really stuck with me. He talked about how this whole thing is about more than just the money. It's about the kind of country we want to be. He said, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, that if we're okay with our government wasting billions on stuff that doesn't help us, then we're basically saying, we don't care about our own future. But if we stand up and demand accountability like what DOGE is doing, then we're saying we want a government that actually works for us, not against us. I think that's such a powerful idea. Because it's not just about the dollars and cents. It's about the values we want to live by. Do we want to be a country that lets agencies like USAID run wild with no oversight? Or do we want to be a country that says, hey, you work for us, so you better do right by us? I know which one I'd pick. And I bet you guys do too. And here's the cool part. DOGE isn't just some temporary thing. Kennedy made it clear that this is the start of a bigger shift. He talked about how, under Trump's leadership, we're finally asking the right questions like, where did all our money go? And that's setting the stage for long-term change. I mean, imagine if, a few years from now, every government agency has to go through a DOGE-style audit every year. No more hiding. No more wasting money on random stuff, just straight-up accountability. I think that would be amazing, and it's something we can actually make happen if we keep supporting what DOGE is doing. So, here's my take. I'm all in on DOGE and what they're trying to do. I think Kennedy is absolutely right to back them up. 'Cause this is about more than just one hearing or one agency. It's about fixing a broken system and making sure our government works for us, not the other way around. But I want to hear what you guys think. Are you with me on this? Do you think DOGE should keep going full speed ahead? Or do you think there need to be more checks on what they're doing? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm dying to see what you all have to say. And if you're loving this video so far, don't forget to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss any of my future videos. We've got a lot more to talk about when it comes to holding our government accountable, and I can't wait to dive into it with you guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.